Have you heard about the failed Black Widow film that was almost released in 2004?
No, I didn't.
Let's find out more about this curious project. The early 2000s were a wild time for cinema fans. After years of comic book movies being treated like curse words or strictly for kids, the success of the X-Men films helped convince studios that superheroes were truly the in thing. Plus, it also helped that they made a ridiculous amount of money at the box office. In 2004, Lionsgate decided that it wanted to get in on the capes and spandex, announcing that it was developing a Black Widow film, and the person who'd be writing and directing it would be David Hayter, the scribe behind the first two X-Men films. As both a comic book fan and someone who understood what translated well to the big screen, it seemed like Lionsgate had an easy win on its hands. Seeing the financial and critical success of the likes of Spider-Man and X-Men, it seemed like a no-brainer to tackle a character like Black Widow, who had a great following in the comics, and had all the credentials to be an action superstar on the big screen. And remember, this was about 4 years before the big economic crash, so studios were more than willing to take risks on new properties since the money was flowing and the books were balanced. More importantly, David had an idea for the movie that was sure to be music to the ears of comic book fans everywhere. While the Black Widow film never fully entered production, David had penned a script for the origin story and knew exactly what he wanted. Unlike the smaller flashback sequences that we've seen in previous MCU films about Natasha Romanoff's backstory, this would have been a deeper dive into the character's history. Closely following her comic book origin, it would have shown her being trained to become a super soldier from an early age in a secret Soviet facility. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Natasha would escape to America and become a gardener, keeping her identity and past secret from the world. But there's no such thing as an easy path in a comic book movie, so things would only get a lot worse for her before they got any better. Natasha's previous superiors at the Red Room would come after her, wanting to make her pay and to take her DNA for the next generation of super soldiers. There'd be lots of espionage, mind-blowing action sequences, sneaky double agents, and an explosive final act, where Natasha bombed the Red Room to well and truly destroy her past. Honestly, it sounds like a pretty spectacular movie if you ask us. Equally important, there was a butt-kicking action star who was being eyed for the pivotal part of Black Widow. Naturally, many fans are curious about who would have been cast in the lead role for this film. While Scarlett Johansson was already on the scene back then and making all the right moves, she was slowly transitioning from being seen as a teen star to a more serious actress. Hollywood certainly knew who she was, but she was considered more as an up-and-coming entity, rather than as a box office superstar. As a result of this, and due to her young age, it's unlikely that she would have been anyone's first or second choice at the time. But a name that was heavily linked to the part of Natasha was none other than Mystique herself, Rebecca Romijn.
I still have blue pores.
At that point in time, Rebecca was ripping it up in the X-Men films, and the director would have been all too familiar with her work as well. Since this was the era before the MCU and shared universes, no one would have blinked had Rebecca been cast as a completely different Marvel character. They probably would have welcomed it. Also, it isn't too hard to imagine Rebecca in the role, since she had the exotic look and necessary action chops to pull off a convincing Black Widow. Unfortunately, we never got to see this happen due to other factors that had nothing to do with the film at all. Sheesh, when they say showbiz is brutal, they aren't kidding. As revealed by David to Fempop, there were a number of female vigilante movies popping up around the time he was writing his script. From the likes of Tomb Raider to Kill Bill, action heroines were in high demand and every studio wanted the next big thing. However, there was a film starring Charlize Theron that ended up being the death knell in any potential Black Widow movie plans. David said the following: Aeon Flux didn't open well, and 3 days after it opened, the studio said, "We don't think it's time to do this movie." I accepted their logic in terms of the saturation of the marketplace, but it was pretty painful. Even worse, David had actually named his newborn daughter Natasha after the lead character in the movie. Thankfully, Natasha is a pretty common name, so it's not like she was named Gamora or Groot, and had to wonder why she had such an odd name for the rest of her life. David didn't give up on the film though, as he shopped his script to other studios around town. The only condition was they had to respect the character and story. Sadly, no one took the bite, and the project kinda disappeared into the nothingness after a while. And by 2006, the rights to the character reverted to Marvel. And with the release of Iron Man at the beginning of the MCU, this all but effectively killed off David's Black Widow movie. Despite his script being a definitive origin story for Natasha, the new movie doesn't use his screenplay, or even elements from it at all.
I wouldn't stress about it.
Of course, it makes sense, since there's no point in releasing a full-blown origin for a character that's been around for over a decade now. Seriously, everyone knows who she is by now. Still, it's intriguing to think think what David's movie might have been and how the fans would have reacted to it. Perhaps it would have kick-started an earlier version of the MCU, or at the very least, launched the heroine into the mainstream. We guess that we'll never know now. But if you're in the mood for some more comic book girl power, then you need to check out our video about Harley Quinn and all the outrageous CGI, visual effects, and makeup in her movies. And while you're at it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and stay awesome!